The biggest question that I have is actually, like, were people getting drunk at Nikki Haley's event last night?
100%. There was this woman who was like straight out of central casting for like, could have been Real Housewife of Portsmouth or whatever. Yeah, she was stopped to be interviewed by somebody, and I was like,
girly.
It's gonna be a fun interview.
I'm Grace Weinstein, and this is WTF America. You're here with me and the Recount senior political producer, Steve Morris, who just got back from the Real Housewives of New Hampshire.
Absolutely.
As it was. How long were you there? 4 days?
4 or 5 days, yeah.
4 or 5
All
days.
blends together.
Was this your first time going to a campaign event?
First time on the trail, first time out there. I've been to like events before,
Right.
but this was the first time actually out there on the trail, going from thing to thing, bus, club, another club, etc. It is an adrenaline rush. It's super fun. I get why people get hooked on it.
And you went to Nikki Haley events and Donald Trump events?
And Trump events.
Ron DeSantis in the mix?
No Ron DeSantis events. There was a hot second where DeSantis had rescheduled events for New Hampshire, including scheduling something at the New Hampshire Institute for Politics, which is where a lot of candidates traditionally pass through in like kind of an homage to the political class up there. And then he promptly dropped out while I was in a Taco Bell on my way to Donald Trump.
What was the best event that you went to? Like, I need to know everything about the vibe in the room.
So the top two things I would say are all the things we read about in the media about like Haley is the candidate of more college educated, wealthier Republicans. Trump is the candidate of more working class, whatever kind of people, was so real. I went to an event that Nikki Haley held in a charter school library, and it was not completely full. There were like maybe 100 or so people there. This was maybe with a day or two left to go. And you just saw like Ralph Lauren, sweaters and whatever. It was, nothing abnormal, especially for New Hampshire. But then going from that in the morning to Trump's event at night, and just seeing like camo and, you just saw a very visceral cultural difference between the kinds of people who showed up to Nikki Haley events and to Trump events. And that was clarifying in a lot of ways.
Clarifying and also like reflected clearly in the results that came out of last night, I feel like. Mm-hmm. A lot of people were saying she really has to overperform in like college towns, and he really needs to hold strong in the rural towns. And like the exchange of those voters were something that we saw in Iowa and clearly were demonstrated in the results from last night. It ended up being at like, 54-43
so.
Trump
Yeah.
Haley. So those are the results from the New Hampshire primary. 54 Donald Trump, 43 Nikki Haley. What can we make of those numbers? Is that better than we anticipated, worse than we anticipated for Trump, I mean?
Yeah, so the top line here, and there's a bunch we could say about the event last night because it was a microcosm of a lot of stuff. Top line is Trump won, right? And there was a little bit of an element here, over the last days, she returned to this theme a lot of, and she said this in her speech last night, of we started out with 12 people, I was at 2%, and now, all of them are gone, I'm the last one left. To me, that's a great way to think about it. If you start the last lap in Mario Kart in 12th place and then somehow end up in second. I've been playing Mario Kart recently. But this is not Mario Kart, This is an election. The point is to get first. Granted, there are real examples of someone who parlays starting out really low and then finishing well into something big. An example might be Pete Buttigieg, who went from a nobody to one of the members of the presidential cabinet because he performed so well. But the problem is, A, Trump is not magnanimous, known for that kind of relationship with the people who run against him. And B, there just isn't a huge amount of evidence that the reason Nikki Haley is going to has ended up as the last person is because of her as opposed to the deficiencies of the people who dropped out.
It is the deficiencies of the people that drop out. And then also to me, I think it's the voting base in New Hampshire. They have a really unique electorate where I was reading that, 70% of the registered Republicans in that state voted for Trump. 70% of the unaffiliated, or what do they call them?
Yeah, unaffiliated, I think. Yeah. Just independents.
Independents in that country, because New Hampshire is an open primary. You can go and select if you want to vote on the Republican line or the Democrat line. So there's a big population of independent voters. She harnessed, lassoed 70% of those people. So I've just been transfixed by the group of people there that are voting. And it seems to me like it was more that people were turning out to vote against Donald Trump than to vote for Nikki Haley.
Yeah, I don't know if it was, I can't remember the exact number. I don't think it was quite 70%, but the thing I did see was that there was the largest gap between how Republicans voted in the primary and how independents voted in the primary, because they've been tracking that for quite a while. And in the past, a lot of people who've won the New Hampshire primary, like John McCain in 2000, have done so while losing Republicans or tying among Republicans and then just winning in a blowout among independents. But that formula didn't work for Haley because she lost Republicans by such a large margin that winning independents by a lot just wasn't enough for her. My question for you is, you were talking about her being super scripted. I mean, the question at the end of the day is, who is she trying to be, you know? To me, the biggest and most successful political leaders who are able to lead this kind of insurgent movement against someone the establishment has coalesced around are people who give voters this vision to buy into, this feeling of what it will be like when they're president. What do you think like that selling point is for Nikki Haley? Can you even answer that? I don't know if I can answer that.
To me, no, because she presents herself as a canvas on which anybody can throw what they want to see onto, and she just like adopts that the way, you know, cats go into a box and start fitting the shape of the box. Like, she just shape shifts to fit whatever the mood of the room that she's in is, and that's confusing to a voter like me who wants consistency and a very clear vision like you're talking about. And I think the reason that doesn't click for potential Republican voters that she was hoping to peel off of Donald Trump is because she doesn't do the anger. She doesn't do the grievance. She doesn't do the they're coming for you. And that is ultimately central to the MAGA Republican identity. So that wasn't going to work for her. So I think she has tried to play to this middle that obviously really exists in New Hampshire, but probably doesn't play elsewhere in the country, where it's either, okay, I'm MAGA Republican doing the inflammatory shit that she doesn't respond well to, or if they want the projection of stability and the enemy you know is the better than the friend you don't, or whatever that phrase is, they're going to go with Joe Biden. So that leaves her in this like vacant room, kind of being like, I feel like I'm speaking to people, but I'm not exactly sure who they are. And that's kind of been the hurdle that I can't jump over with her.
Well, speaking of speaking to people, there weren't a ton of people in the rooms in which she was in New Hampshire. And that's the thing, you know, it's not always an unenthusiastic vote counts the same as a super enthusiastic vote. You only get one, doesn't matter what your motivation is for casting it. So you can have really tiny crowds and still win an election, Joe Biden in 2020, as opposed to Trump, who had tens of thousands. But all of the things, and this is something I really picked up on talking to people up there on the ground in New Hampshire, all of the things that would traditionally point to a surging campaign, someone who comes out of Iowa and really just says, I am going to do this, I'm going to turn things around, weren't there. You know, you look at previous people who've turned it around after Iowa, after losing there, and then gone on to win New Hampshire. John McCain in 2000, Hillary Clinton in 2008, Bernie Sanders in 2016, Trump in 2016. They all have this attitude of going to every corner, shaking a bunch of hands, just going balls to the wall, engaging with the press, and most importantly, combining this kind of populist movement attitude. And none of that is really Nikki Haley. She's a Southerner, she's a woman of color, she has this kind of genteel attitude on the stump, but is also deeply conservative in her policy. She just didn't have any of the pieces. And then on top of that, was really scripted on the stump. She didn't have a bunch of press availability. She didn't really stray from her talking points. And I do think that really hampered her.
Wait, I saw this crazy moment from this weekend. I'm just thinking about this right now, where she was stumping somewhere and an older woman in the crowd says something along the lines of like, can you look over here? Like, make eye contact with me over here. And she looked MTV level punked. Like, poop in the pants vibe. She looked terrified.
Haley.
Yes, and the way that she's kind of unable to roll with the punches, fighting against a candidate who is not just rolling with punches, but is throwing them, it just always has left her in a race to keep up in the way that she can. And it's like hard to watch to me, especially going into South Carolina, her home state, where she's down by what?
A lot.
50?
A lot. I would, a lot. Yeah. So that's the thing too. I was at that event where the older woman interrupted her, and that was at the charter school, and she was giving her standard thing about age of Trump and Biden, and saying, she said, do we really want two presidential candidates in their 80s? By the way, Trump not quite 80. He also had a little riff about this. Yeah, he was like, there's a big difference between 77 and 80, which, hey. And then this woman interrupted her, famously cantankerous New Hampshireites, and she said, can you look over here? There are a lot of senior citizens here. And Haley did stumble a little bit, and then, was trying to pitch it as, I'm not saying, she had this line where she was like, we all know senior citizens who can run circles around us, whatever, to try to massage it a little bit. But yeah, that was a little bit of, salt in the CD-ROM player or whatever, I don't know, the salt inside the computer, the thing that makes the computer chip go, blah, and the fact that she didn't stray from the talking points really at all, even when there was a lot to play with for her, I think is going to be a shoulda, coulda, woulda moment for her. My main thing looking at her event last night was I heard some lines I hadn't heard before. I heard some sharpness I hadn't quite heard before. Yeah, she debuted some new material. Yeah. Did you clock that?
I did. It still felt within that narrow spectrum that she swings in.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I wasn't like, oh shit, great line. Get him, Nikki. And to contrast that for a second with Trump's speech that he gave last night, which I will say, he had a rally on Monday or sometime over the weekend where he was dripping sweat. But on Tuesday last night, I thought he looked, as well kempt and as well put together, if not still a little burnt orange more than the average person's skin tone. But he presented well. Where it went wrong for me was he goes out there and says, because I don't get angry, I get even, and then proceeds to spend 30 minutes being actually the angriest person I've ever seen. Man shakes fist at Cloud, and Cloud is Nikki Haley, who's non-threatening to him in any way. What the hell was that speech last night?
So I think he's mad. He was pretty clearly mad. So here's the thing. I think Haley checks a lot of the boxes that traditionally make him mad. She's a woman. She's a person of color. She is a pre-Trump Republican. And I think he does have genuine, I don't know how, trying to assign, how much genuine policy views he has is a difficult thing, but he does have genuine disdain for the establishment before him. And I think he really wanted it wrapped up. He wanted to win by more, too. Some of the polls showed him winning by 20 points or more, and it wasn't ultimately that. He won comfortably, but it wasn't what a lot of polls, ended up predicting.
The last one I saw, I think, was 60-38.
Yeah, some of the polls, kind of raised expectations in the final few hours before. Here's the thing, and this is where I want to do a thought experiment with you. Say Barack Obama lost in 2012, his re-election bid, and then he ran in 2016. And in Iowa, he got 51%. And in New Hampshire, against his former UN ambassador, Susan Rice was his UN ambassador, he got 54% to her 43%. Would we look at that as a super strong showing from former President Barack Obama running for president?
No, I would not be impressed by that at all. I'd be, if I were him, shaking the table, Teresa Giudice, Real Housewives of New Jersey style, flipping the table to my campaign managers. What the fuck is going on here?
So that's the thing. At the end of the day, Trump has now made history as the first non-incumbent Republican to win both Iowa and New Hampshire. Previously, no non-incumbent has ever done that in the primary contest. And that is real, genuine, and he is very clearly on a path to the nomination. Something huge would have to happen to stop that. But he's essentially running as a pseudo-incumbent. He's not like other non-incumbent challengers running. We haven't had a former president try to return to the White House since Herbert Hoover almost 100 years ago. So there isn't precedent for this, and I do think that there is this, how do we measure him? Because if we're measuring him as an incumbent, these first two victories, aren't wildly impressive. And I think that's part of why Nikki Haley is going on. She's seeing, and the results in New Hampshire showed this, even though it's unique, there was real evidence that there is this consistent emerging chunk of the party. It's not a majority. It's not even close to a majority, but it is a chunk that is not down with Donald Trump.
Yeah. The stat that I saw was something around 30% of people, or 1/3 of people, maybe 33%, would not vote for him if he were charged or convicted of a crime. He's been charged 91 times, but if he were convicted of a crime, they wouldn't vote for him. So let's say even that...
A third within the Republican Party.
Yes, in New Hampshire. Let's say that of that 33%, 10% say, if in that case, if he's convicted of a crime, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. It's over.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing at the end of the day. And that's what the Biden campaign is really hanging their hat on. You know, today this week, they've started to really transition into general election mode. And whether Nikki Haley has done that or not, Joe Biden is saying it's over. Pick between the two of us. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You're in Nikki Haley's shoes. You're going to your home state. You know your way down. You know literally the entire establishment is united against you. She still only has one endorsement from all the Republicans in Congress. Only one has endorsed her, Ralph Norman from South Carolina. And you know that a miracle would have to happen. How are you campaigning the next 4 weeks? What are you doing differently?
What am I doing if I'm Nikki Haley moving forward? I am putting on a pair of running shoes. I am putting on a hoodie. I am getting out there saying, let's go on a walk together. I am going into a Waffle House. I am showing up in places where normal people operate. I think there's a version of her that's so corporatized, so Wall Street, so elitist, and they've really, cast her straight into that role. And she said, fine, let me be that role. I'll do that for you. You're going to fund my campaign. That's fine. I'll be in the box that you put me in. But I'd get down home and dirty. This actually makes me think about Joe Biden last week, I believe in North Carolina, went to this random family's home. The dad was an educator and bought them cookout, which dying to go to a cookout.
Still never had.
Never been. Okay, let's fucking go. I will literally book a flight just to get it. And had either lunch or dinner with this family, and the kids TikToked it, and it had like 5 million views. That probably cost them what, $30 for the cookout meal, $0 for the user-generated content that went viral. Like, show that, be active, go be engaged in your community in a real humanized way.
I think those are great points, and if she has,
you better watch this show,
literally.
Nikki Haley.
Yeah, number 3 beyond those two things is watch this show. Apparently. I mean, she's got to get out of her comfort zone, her box. There is a huge, long tradition in presidential politics of people right when they're up against the wall or when they know they have lost, becoming the best version of themselves as candidates.
Because there's nothing to lose.
There's nothing left to lose. And that's the thing. And that's the irony of presidential politics in a way. And I do wonder whether in this final stretch before she likely drops out. We're not guaranteeing anything, but that's probably where we're headed. I do wonder whether we'll get a different version of her. And if she wants to win or even have a chance, I would follow your advice.
It's like nobody puts baby in the corner, and maybe these fucking campaign managers should be like, you're going in the corner. You're going, because that's the only place that we're going to get something good out of you if you're panicked and trapped in the corner. So let's say Nikki Haley drops out in the next 6 weeks. Does she follow suit with what Ron DeSantis, this is a two-part question. Does she follow suit with what Ron DeSantis did, which is immediate, kiss the ring, our Lord and Savior, I've actually been here the whole time, what can I do to help you, whatever? Or does she stray away from that? And the reason I was thinking about this is because on stage last night with Trump was Vivek Ramaswamy, Tim Scott, who both just dropped out, singing his praises. Now, Vivek didn't trash him during his campaign. He was very much like I'm Trump mini-me, let me just spew whatever I can in his favor. Tim Scott was critical of Trump.
At times.
At times, obviously
but
not.
But very low-key,
Sure. Presenting himself as a more stable, calm alternative to Donald Trump. And he was up there going, I don't hate Nikki Haley, I just love you. There is a humiliation process that he makes people go through when they've railed against him intensely or lightly. He makes them demonstrate. It feels
loyalty.
Like very mafioso.
Fealty.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, what are you going to do for me to show me that you're loyal now? Great. Humiliate yourself, and then I'll believe that you do that. Will Nikki Haley do that?
I think the answer is no. It is really hard to go back on the things she said about Donald Trump.
That he's mentally incompetent. Yeah.
She said at one event I was at, she said, she was talking about the age stuff, and then she said, we need somebody who's on it for the next 4 years. I'm worried we won't have somebody who's on it for the next 2. And then she said, don't put our country at risk like this. She clearly said that electing Donald Trump would put our country at risk, not because of democratic tendencies or authoritarian tendencies, but because of his age, which is a more mild critique than some people would give.
Right.
But you're just not going to be able to come back from that in the eyes of Trump. I would be shocked at this point if he picked her. I think she would take it in a heartbeat, for sure. Because, we've talked about this a million times, and this is something I think is really important for everyone to remember. If it's Trump versus Biden, will be the first election in U.S. history in which neither one of the two major party candidates will be eligible to run for re-election in 4 years.
Okay, right.
What that means is whoever is vice president next year is going to be the immediate front runner for 2028. And the idea of Donald Trump making Nikki Haley the immediate front runner for the 2028 election, do you see it?
No.
I don't see it. Yeah.
Bird brain?
Yeah.
Even he isn't going to go back on his word that much. I think there's no way.
Yeah.
Oh, that's bizarre. I guess we have to talk about the Democrats for like 20 seconds. Joe Biden wasn't on the ballot in New Hampshire, so he was a write-in candidate and still, 60% of the vote.
Yeah, around 60.
He won versus Dean Phillips, who came out today and said, I think I have 5% name ID, name recognition nationwide.
That's generous.
Is this right? Is this good? Do they care? Does it matter?
So background, the reason Biden wasn't on the ballot is because the Democratic Party decided after 2020 to, for the first time, remove New Hampshire as the first in both New Hampshire and Iowa. They made South Carolina the first state.
Right.
New Hampshire didn't like that. They kept their primary where it was.
Because it's state law, right?
It's state law that they have to be the first.
I would be
in the
offended
nation.
if I were them.
They were. That's the thing. So Biden refused to actually participate, but there was a grassroots funded by National Democrats movement to write him in, and he won that. It didn't tell us a huge amount to me. It told us Democrats are definitely sticking with Biden. There's no chance of otherwise, and that's pretty much all there is to it. But Dean Phillips did not even hit remotely where he would have needed to be taken seriously moving forward. So really only a matter of time for him.
And that's the Democrats in 30 seconds. I guess kind of the last thing we should touch on here is what do we do moving forward if the primaries just are competitionless?
Yeah, the big another thing for us
what the hell?
Another thing for us to process is if Trump wraps this up, even in the next few weeks, it will be the longest general election where both candidates are set in modern history, arguably ever. And remember, about 70% of Americans say that they do not want this matchup. So
they're going to give us the longest matchup of a lifetime.
Exactly. Yeah, and that'll be about 9 months of the two oldest presidents in history, a matchup that 70% of Americans don't want going at it. You can say you want that or you love either one of the candidates. I'm just saying that's what Americans are saying.
They should cut a backroom deal, these two old farts in the wind, and say, let's just pick it up in August. Let's just do nothing. Let's just pick it up in August.
Let's both go on vacation for a bit.
Do as the French do. Let's pick it up in September.
Yeah.
Everybody goes off on vacation in August.
Yeah.
Pick it up in September. You have an 8-week campaign. That's final.
Yeah. And we could all spend the next 4 months
doing anything else.
We all could do a little creative project together, maybe. A nationwide escape room or something.
We already live in a nationwide escape room, honestly.
The only thing I would say is, yes, if you want more competition, if you don't like these two candidates, these results might be dispiriting. But you can look forward to a all-out, knuckle-dragging brawl on both sides of the aisle, in all likelihood, in 4 years. So,
and also amazingly competitive Senate races, House races happening.
There's a lot going on.
That's what you should pay attention to. Abortion referendums. Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll talk about that. Referenda. Mm-hmm. I'll never say that. Maybe we'll talk about that next time.
Yeah, we should.
For now, thank you for watching What the Fuck America. Make sure to like and subscribe. Catch you later.